Welcome to the Kaiser Report. I'm Max Kaiser. You know, bankers in the City of London have been naughty boys. And as Laura Ingalls Wilder, author of Little House on the Prairie, wrote, once you begin being naughty, it is easier to go on and on and on, and sooner or later something dreadful happens. Right, Stacey?
Well, Max, obviously something very dreadful happened as we had the financial collapse and the ongoing greatest, possibly, depression of all. And now they've brought in somebody to punish, apparently, the naughty boys in the City of London. Bankers' outrages will be punished, says City Cleanup Chief. Bank of England deputy launches attack on appalling behavior. So the Bank of England Deputy Governor Nimmat Shafik said last night that more could be done to punish traders following a series of appalling cases of misconduct over recent years. The 52-year-old highlighted truly shocking evidence of traders manipulating the prices of everything from gold and oil to lead and coffee, as well as fixing interest rates and currencies.
Right. Well, she's just brought in to provide lip service and a bit of a cosmetic approach to address. You know, she never mentions crimes.
No, she doesn't mention crimes in this speech she gave before the London School of Economics. She calls it misconduct, appalling, shocking, all of these things, but never mentions the crime and that we need to clean up this behavior. But, you know, here we have an economy where bankers pay a lot of money to be punished in the way that she's suggesting.
Oh, you mean the S&M trade?
Yeah.
Yeah, these same bankers go down to Soho and they have some latex-wearing dominatrix beat them with a cat o' nine tails, and they pay them good money for that. So she's some woman who wants to come in there and, you know, pull the banker's pants down and give him a good spanking, which is what they pay good money for. If they can get it cheaper from some Egyptian babe, you know, then it's just more for them.
Well, she said, again, she finds this this behavior of theirs outrageous. And then she was speaking at the London School of Economics. Dr. Shafik said, the initial argument that it is just the case of a few bad apples is no longer credible. It seems there were deep-rooted problems. So she's leading a review into the fixed income currency and commodity markets, which is called FICC, F-I-C-C. But if you look through her language that she's using, it's just like one of these fake inquiries that they have here, or earlier in the week we had the fake stress test across Europe. All of these things are fake for the audience, as fake as, well, a dominatrix spanking her bad banker client.
Well, I've been involved in this for 30 years, and I can tell you the game. Dr. Shafik, is going to be attacking the crimes from 5 years ago. So whatever she's going to be attacking, whatever market manipulation she's talking about, is from 5 years ago. It's never about attacking the crimes of today. I can tell Dr. Shafik what crimes are being committed today, and there should be prosecutions and arrests today for crimes today, but they don't want to arrest people in the City of London because, A, they've got the City of London held hostage, and they say if you arrest us, then we're going to crash the economy because they're suicide bankers, like we've been talking about, no different than a guy walking into a cafe in Tel Aviv, pulling the ripcord and blowing up a few people. That's the bankers on HSBC. They're suicide bankers. So Shafik's not going to stop the suicide bankers because she's there to provide cover for suicide banking. She's adding to the problem because it's going to make it look like something's being done. But maybe she'll go on Newsnight or BBC or one of these programs and say we're going to do something. She's a tool. She's a tool. She's being used as a tool. She's being used as a god-awful tool.
Well, she read out some of the emails that happened between the various bankers fixing LIBOR rates. And they mentioned in the article that LIBOR rigging is now a crime, they say, that in the future could result in up to 7 years prison sentence if you rig LIBOR rates. Of course, as we've seen and as we've covered on this show, for years they were rigging LIBOR rates. This is several hundreds of trillions of dollars of contracts from here all the way through China to the U.S. and beyond. Contracts around the world are set based on the LIBOR rate, and yet they're saying it's going to be a future crime. It'll be a crime in the future. Let's move past all of this. One of the biggest conspiracies in the history of finance that has just happened here in London. So, like her using her language of outrageous behavior, shocking, outrageous, we need to spank these boys. This is like us, this is her being like Barack Obama when he first came into office. We need to move past these past crimes.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen this for years and years and years. They come in after the crimes have been committed, and they give their blessing to the crime by saying we're going to be proactively cleaning up these criminal behaviors going forward. But the bankers and the financial engineers come up with new crimes and new ways to skirt the law. So the LIBOR scandal and the Forex scandal and the manipulation of the gold market scandal, those things they've all been profited from and tossed aside. Bankers are not engaged in those particular crimes at this moment. They're engaged in a new set of crimes. I'll be happy to tell you what the new set of crimes are. We do so on the show. Will Dr. Shafiq, bother to listen and address the actual criminal behavior going on today? No, because this corruption at the highest levels of government is concerned about putting people in jail who are stealing, a box of donuts at the corner shop, to stay alive due to austerity that's imposed maliciously and cruelly to support Dr. Shafiq's lip service and coverage of what is a criminal syndicate of which she's providing verbal cover.
You said her name different every single time.
Nobody's going to remember this person in 3 months. I guarantee you, no one's going to remember Dr. Flanique in 3 months. She's going to put up there, and then she's going to be gone. And everyone says, see, we're going to do, but it didn't. It's absolute not. She should just jump off a building right now and save us all a moment, save us some money,
Well, exactly. She could be earning money for us because we have contacts in the S&M community who give us the information. Their banker clients come in and are already admitting to the crimes they're doing now. I've been a bad boy. Spank me, Mrs.
Yeah, unless this Shafiq woman shows up in a leather cat suit with a cat of nine tails, pulling the pants down of bankers and spanking them on the it's worthless. So just go home and shut up.
FICC, that's the fixed income currency and commodity markets that are being rigged, and she says they allowed their culture to get out of control. Now, regarding a similar crime wave, here is what The Economist said when they looked at Mexico and the problems of Mexico and why Mexico can't develop and modernize. Well, the tweet from The Economist said, to modernize, Mexico needs law and order as much as economic reform. So 3 heavy words sum up the challenge now facing Mr. Peña and Mexico as a whole: impunity, accountability, and governability. Mr. Castañeda says Mr. Peña sent the wrong signal on impunity from the start by failing to investigate the disappearances of 22,000 people in Mexico in the 2006 to 2012 drug war launched by his predecessor, Felipe Calderón, and during his own administration. So there you have it. Impunity, accountability, and governability. You have the same situation here, and yet it's not 22,000 that are necessarily beheaded and left or hanging from bridges. It's 22,000 times 10, savings accounts, pension funds, everything wiped out and beheaded in terms of capital and wealth.
Yeah, okay. In Mexico, 22,000 dead. We know many have been beheaded. Okay, HSBC, they admitted laundering money for the Mexican drug cartels. They admitted laundering money for Hezbollah, which this government says is a terrorist organization. And is Dr. Fick saying anything about that? No. Does she have any notion about, what about RBS? Just said that they were laundering money for Hamas, another group that this government says are terrorist organizations. Is she saying anything about that?
Well, this is what I'm saying. Impunity, accountability, and governability. It's the opposite here, however. They're saying to modernize, Mexico needs law and order as much as economic reform. Here they always push economic reform, but they discard law and order as well. They don't care about the law and order, and without that, the economy is crumbling. That's why we have a continually crumbling economy, whether it's in Europe, UK, or the U.S.
Right, you can't have an economy without law and order. You can't have a market without regulation.
Exactly.
There's no such thing as anarcho-capitalism. That's called terrorism. These two things are not, they're mutually, they go together. Markets need to have some semblance of law and order. You just can't have people with a gun saying, I own everything due to my perception of the, it galls me that this country allows this to happen without any recourse whatsoever, that they allow these bankers to engage in mass murder and beheadings in these countries, foreign countries. Yeah. Mind you, when there's a beheading here in the UK, everyone's like, somebody got their head cut off here in Britain. Yeah, duh. What about the 20,000 beheadings you're responsible for in Mexico, you freaking duplicitous idiots?
So in the UK, they're looking for their crumbling infrastructure to be refinanced and fixed by the Chinese. The Chinese have a new infrastructure bank. And what happens in China? Why do they have so much wealth? Well, of course, if a banker steals, or a CEO steals, or a CEO defrauds the economy and defrauds investors, what happens? They are hung. Well, here's an interesting final headline here regarding a very manipulated market, and that's the oil market, and that China goes on a crude oil buying spree as global prices tumble to $85 a barrel. China is snapping up unusually high amounts of crude oil as global prices hit their lowest level in years, Wall Street Journal reported on Monday. The buying spree could boost the weak international demand for oil, which has helped to push down prices by more than 25% over the past 5 months. So China's National Petroleum Corporation has purchased 36 cargoes of crude oil in the open market. That's 18 million barrels of crude. They're putting it in their strategic reserves. So they're betting that these prices are artificially suppressed, and it's not due to real supply and demand or whatever.
No, look, NATO pushed east into Russia, basically. And they started a proxy war, World War III, in the Ukraine. And as part of this ongoing new war, they used paper contracts to drop the price of oil to where it is now in the 80s, under $80 a barrel. So China, of course, is like, okay, well, America is so stupid. We're just going to buy all this cheap oil under the $80 a barrel and put it, in these tankers because it's worth a lot more than that. So, and again, hoisted by their own petard is a phrase that comes to mind. So the U.S. is like boxing, in a vat of marshmallow. They're shadow boxing in marshmallows. Like they're trying to keep their empire alive. Meanwhile, they're going to lose Baghdad. It looks like the embassy in Baghdad is going to fall to ISIS, and they're going to have Americans helicoptered off the top of the embassy, like in Saigon. This is what's coming in Baghdad. So you're going to have a replay of the Vietnam War images of America running away with a tail between its legs, helicoptering off Saigon. Make a good movie about it. Somebody call Francis Ford Coppola. Apocalypse Now again. All right, we got to go.
Don't be a naughty boy.
Oh, yeah? I like Egyptian dominatrix women. Hey, stay tuned for the second half. A whole lot more. Welcome back to the Kaiser Report. I'm Max Kaiser. Time now to turn to Dan Collins, publisher of the China Money Report. Dan, welcome back to the Kaiser Report.
Thanks, Max.
All right, Dan, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, what is it?
Yeah, the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, or the AIIB, is a brand new multinational bank launched here in Beijing with a market initial capitalization of about $50 billion. China is going to own around 50% of the voting shares. India's come in. A total of 21 countries altogether were present at the launch in Beijing. The mission of the bank is really to provide loans, infrastructure loans across Asia to developing countries in order to build infrastructure.
Okay, now Australia, Indonesia, and South Korea skipped the launch. Why is that? And how was this apparent snub received by the press in China?
Yeah, this was, called a completely example of American hypocrisy. America goes around the world touting, free trade and democracy, but only when it works for them. So basically what this is, and it is a power play by China to, further integrate the economies in Asia. And they're going to start, when they set these loans out, it's going to be Chinese banks that are making the loans. And it's going to be Chinese rail companies that get the rail contracts and Chinese electrical companies that get the electrical contracts. It's something very similar to what we've been doing in the West, in Latin America and other places for decades. So it was really seen as very hypocritical for the United States to put huge pressure behind into South Korea and Australia and Indonesia to block them from joining. All three countries' largest trade partner is China and not the United States.
Right. So presumably the bank competes with the U.S.-backed World Bank and the Asian Development Bank. So how do the terms and conditions of the new bank compare, and how, it's a competitive bank, right? So the World Bank is the bank that is set up currently, mostly U.S. backed, and as you point out, this is a competition for them. Is this part of the global, what's called de-dollarization, Dan?
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, eventually a lot of these, collateralization of loans will be in renminbi and Chinese yuan to the other countries in Asia. The de-dollarization is a major story in China and Russia and many countries, and Brazil has been for the last several years. But absolutely, it's a competitor to the Asian Development Bank, which is, controlled by U.S. and Japan. But, the Asian development capitalization now is only $21 billion. So this new Chinese bank is going to be twice that size. And China has $4 trillion in currency reserves. They can move this bank to multiples of the current launch size. So I think that's really caught Washington's attention, and to this power play by China to just really see them go global and learn a lot of the lessons that we've been doing in the West, for several decades.
Now, of course, when you talk about the reserves in China, $4 trillion with the reserves, and the fact that this could be a weapon, so to speak, in this conflict with the U.S., this emerging conflict, people bring up the symbiotic relationship between the two countries, that it would be economic suicide for China to dump dollars, let's say, and really take on the U.S. dollar empire. But it seems like, since you and I have been talking about this for the last 2 or 3 years, the rhetoric is definitely heating up. At what point does China pull the plug and say, we don't want this so-called symbiotic relationship anymore, and they just strike out on their own? Is that a day coming?
It's absolutely coming. We've also talked on the show about the petro yuan. Russia selling oil to China in renminbi. The next countries that are going to do that: Sudan, Angola, some of the world's largest oil producers, Iran, all very good friends of China. They could price in renminbi tomorrow. As the U.S. has their new shale reserves, the international oil market is going to become a renminbi market. So you have the end of the petrodollar, the rise of a petro yen. You have China, the world's largest economy, largest creditor nation, largest trading nation, and the whole world seeing the U.S. as a free rider on the global economy. 100 million people not working, not having to pay for any imports, running massive trade surpluses, trade deficits, government deficits, all paid for by printed money. That system can't continue, and the world's putting in the economic infrastructure right now to displace it.
All right, so Dan, let's talk about Shanghai Hong Kong Connect scheme. What is this?
This is a real interesting change in China that's really going to lay the foundations for capital outflow from China to the rest of the world, and capital inflow from the rest of the world to China. What this is going to do, this is going to allow Chinese mainland investors to buy international stocks all around the world through Hong Kong, and it's going to allow international investors for the first time to access Chinese domestic companies in the A-share market through Hong Kong. So really, it's going to be a huge impetus to send capital in and out of China. A lot of financial people in China are talking about this is really backdoor liberalization of the currency, and really what people call the next spike in the currency war.
Speaking of Hong Kong, obviously there's been a lot of protests in Hong Kong recently. I think the rhetoric in China is that this is like another U.S.-sponsored color uprising, whereas in the West, it's folks yearning for democracy and freedom. What's going on there? Because obviously you're talking about a lot of initiatives going through Hong Kong. Is this political element playing? Does it have any possibility of gaining any strength, Dan?
Yeah, I see I think it's probably reached its peak at this point. It's a little on both sides. There are issues and real demands from Hong Kong citizens for democracy. At the same time, absolutely there are. And the chief executive of Hong Kong has threatened to come out with proof of foreign involvement, i.e. U.S. involvement in this. For me, it takes me back to the days of the so-called Jade Revolution in China. I was in Shanghai watching this for weeks, talked about on CNN, and it turned out to be 12. Anyone from China I talked to knew nothing about some Jade Revolution. And it turned out to be 12 people at a McDonald's and one person laid down a jade flower. So much for 2 weeks of reporting on CNN. So that didn't work. So I think, the intelligence agencies have taken this to Hong Kong with the idea that if they can get it to Hong Kong and spread it in Hong Kong, maybe it'll spread across China. Will it work? Probably not.
You mentioned McDonald's there for a second. In China, as China gets to be more in a conflict position with the U.S., are some of these icons of American culture coming under closer scrutiny?
I haven't seen anything like that. Where you get the friction is with the Japanese product. So as you know, Japanese cars have been burned. There was a whole street in Suzhou of Japanese restaurants burned to the ground, when conflicts arise. Nothing like that on the American side. Recently, I do remember when we bombed the Chinese embassy in Serbia back in the Yugoslav war. I was trapped in a bar with about a crowd of 1,000 people looking for Americans. But that hasn't happened recently. Generally, Chinese people like Americans. Will it escalate if things continue? It could. I think this year China has gone after a lot of Western companies trying to defend some markets that foreign companies totally dominate, like the vehicle market, for instance. But we could see escalation in the future.
Yeah, well, of course, Japanese atrocities in China are remembered vividly. Probably the worst atrocities of the past 100 years of any group upon any other group. It's not talked about all that much here in the United States and Britain, where they focus on Europe and what happened there. But speaking of the currency wars, Jim Rickards recently had a viral hit in China. Jim's big in China. Is he opening up on the stage? Is he going to do the Jim Rickards the musical in Shanghai? What's going on?
Yeah, he needs to come over and get a show, get the Jim Rickards show on TV. I think he was referencing an article that was the third or fourth most viral article in China, talking about what the gold price would be if you factored in all of the money printing. So inflation plus money printing, if governments had to backstop their currency with gold, which they always have done until the 1970s, gold would be at $7,000 an ounce. Gold's getting a lot of play in the Chinese press this year because...
But Dan, why now? Because Rickards has been saying this for a number of years. Why, at this moment, suddenly did people figure out that if you were to price all these derivatives in gold, it would be worth $7,000 or higher?
Well, I don't know. I put that to maybe somebody finally got around to translate one of his articles. It just showed up this week as like the number 3 or 4 article, but I have heard that before, in Bloomberg and other places.
All right, finally, Dan, you write on your very excellent China Money Report, .com, that China steel prices are now the same price as cabbage. What's going on there?
Yeah, this is one of the industries in China where the government has got involved, and they try to build, steel is a hallmark of the old communist planning system. Steel production used to separate developing economies from developed economies, and it used to win wars, and the communists could never make enough steel. So they focus on steel. What turned into a good story has turned into a nightmare. Every city's tried to build steel mills. On the other side, the flip side, the U.S. and the U.K. have closed all their factories, which is another disaster. But the end result today is China makes more steel now in 6 weeks than the United States makes all year. United States and U.K. both make less steel than they did in 1920. So that's the bad side. In China, what's becoming a nightmare is they have one city here, Tangshan, which produces more steel than all of Europe combined. They produce half the world's steel. So what's happening is the prices continue to go down and down. Coal and oil, the 2 main drivers of steel material costs, are still going lower, yet steel's continuing to drop. Steel companies are not making money. They're being propped up by local governments. Steel, renewables, there's, even housing in some areas is one of these hallmarks where the local investment wants, local government wants to ramp up GDP in a certain area. And
anyway, Dan Collins, we're out of time. Thanks so much for being on the Kaiser Report.
Thanks, Max.
All right, that's going to do it for this edition of the Kaiser Report with me, Max Kaiser, and Stacey Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Dan Collins of the ChinaMoneyReport.com. If you'd like to get in touch, tweet us at Kaiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.